Yeah, it's recording anyway.
Perfect. Well, it's great to see you, and it's great to be able to speak to you live
Yeah,
in
great.
real and
Absolutely.
in real time. It's almost like we're in the same room here. But
Absolutely.
David, I read the article that you've written about the protests in Portland, and I found it very, very, very interesting. And they stimulated a few thoughts and ideas in my mind in and around why has that protest been so successful, and that's been consecutive for, I don't know, 50 or 52 or 55 nights.
Yeah,
So
it keeps on building.
it does it all right, excellent, because
I
we
mean, it
normally
was
think it
it
would be
was
the
not
opposite.
always constant, but it was. I think it kept on going, and I mean, they say it was getting smaller, but I think it was going in waves, depending on a lot of factors.
Okay.
But one of the things that kept on, I mean, but it was for one thing, it was police response was terrible.
Hmm.
That's so that tended to get a lot of people angry and get a lot more people into the streets after a whole bunch of people got tear gassed. That was one factor, I think. Another factor was every time some new lynching occurred somewhere else in the country, by carried out by police or whatever, that tended to get into the news around here and then piss people off more, as it did elsewhere. That was one factor. Another was people, certain elements had the goal of taking over police stations like they did in Minneapolis and Seattle.
So that,
And so there was some element that would never be happy until they could take the police station over, so that's kind of a high bar, but it keeps the street fighting going, because if you don't get what your goal is, if you don't haven't made your goal, if the goal is to
mhm.
actually get the police to flee and take over the station, that's a pretty high bar. And it happened in a couple of situations in Minneapolis and in Seattle, fairly early on after the George Floyd killing. But it didn't get repeated elsewhere, as far as I know. That sort of abandonment of the police stations.
Okay. What do you think? Obviously, there's been like a lot. It's not a revolution in inverted commas, but there's a catalyst. The latest catalyst was the murder of George Floyd. But is this fitting in with a wider context of what's happening in America, uh, and a broader expanse throughout the world? There seems to be a push. It's certainly in different political arenas throughout the world. There appears to be a push away from neoliberal austerity, with people not necessarily embracing socialism, but they're looking for a change. They're looking for some form of an antidote to, minimum wage, homelessness, lack of social housing, lack of a proper security network for people's welfare benefits. Is this Are we just scratching the surface of a whole kind of beneath the surface anxiety that's kind of another pandemic across the world?
I think, I mean, it's contentious, and I think it depends on who you ask and what kind of answer you'll get to that question. Because I think there are certain folks that would feel that anything that's taking attention away from the issue of institutional racism and
Mhm.
police violence and lynchings against Black people is sort of like distracting in a way. And like where I can see where people are coming from when they're talking about that, but and definitely this uprising was set off by the lynching of George Floyd. But it's also what's been happening, and you hear it coming from so many different quarters of radical Black intellectuals like Cornel West and the minister heads the what is it, the group, there was a Poor People's Economic Rights,
Mhm.
Economic Human Rights campaign. I get all kinds of people amplifying the head of the AME Church, the African Methodist Church in Seattle. All kinds of people making the connection that, well, if like asking the if then statements, like if Black Lives Matter, then what about affordable housing? If Black
Mhm.
Lives Matter, then what about the education not being funded except by local taxes? So ensuring that education is always a sort of an apartheid system in this country. Asking all kinds of questions, like if Black Lives Matter, why is Cancer Alley in Louisiana around all the oil drilling industry, why is it so completely full of Black people? I mean, why do Black people live in the most polluted neighborhoods? I mean, asking these questions, and then it naturally causes anybody with a brain to start making serious analysis about the capitalist system, along with institutional racism, because these things are very, very intimately tied together. And it's very, very obvious, I think, to more increasing numbers of people from across the board that trying to undo institutional racism in the context of a cutthroat capitalist system that has been using racism as a tool to divide people for centuries and has continued to do that. I mean, it's not working. They're not going to solve the problem, and they continue to exacerbate the problem. In fact, the ruling class, in so many different ways, they continue the problem. It's still real, and they're still imprisoning. 2/3 of the people in prison are people of color, and the statistics: 87% of people who work in slaughterhouses are people of color in this country. It's just it's an apartheid state in so many ways, and it's not all about race. There's loads of poor white people as well, but the thing is that people are making these connections all over the place. So I think what's happening, and maybe from the very beginning, is the really basic aspects of the whole structure of the society and are being questioned in all kinds of different ways. So I'd say, it's often being called intersectional. It's certainly multiracial, but it's a very broad kind of thing that's starting to happen. Although I think in terms of where it might be going, it's anybody's guess. But definitely there's lots of common talk about things like defunding the police, and that is
the military.
Defunding the military, and it's very clear that the people in power, in the states and most cities, and certainly in the federal government, of both parties, have no interest in defunding police or defunding the military. And in fact, they just passed the biggest military budget ever in the history of the world last week.
On top of the biggest one the previous year. I was just reading that.
Which was the biggest in the history of the world. Yeah.
America's their military expenditures like 35% of the total of the
37% last. I just looked it up yesterday. 37%, according to whatever the source was on top. 37%.
I saw 35% earlier. So there's a couple of questions come out of this. One of them is there a political manifesto from Black Lives Matter? Now, I understand that the people on the street are protesting about the police brutality and institutional racism in America. But is there a political manifesto to come out of this? I'm surprised they're not running a third-party candidate. I'm surprised they didn't take Philanese Floyd, George's brother, and run him as a Black third-party presidential candidate, because Biden, for me, is not a proper... he's not a real contender against Trump. So while you have this duopoly of the Republicans and the Democrats, who are both capitalist elitist parties bought by the corporations, there'll be no change on the ground for anybody, regardless of their race, color, religion in America. So where's it all going to go? It can't just be street protest without a political agenda manifesto to carry through the changes they want to see in government. Or would it be your opinion that maybe a revolution, another American revolution, is maybe the only way to change the status quo?
Well, I mean, I think there's so many different potential ways to influence governments, and we can see that around the world. And just taking very recent examples, I mean, I think like in it's been written about in the mainstream press a lot that the Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vest movement in France, has done more to cause the state to make concessions to the interests of in the interests of the working class. They've done more than the labor movement has in decades. And I don't remember the specifics, but it seemed to be something that a lot of journalists were saying. And I think the same can be said
The
about
labour movement, in some respects, is part of the establishment. That's how I view it here. I'm a
right.
trade union supporter, but I believe that in some level it's all interconnected, and there's no real a bit like
Yeah,
the false thing around politics, the false bosses and trade unions. That people are in comfortable positions, don't want to rock the boat. The people aren't going to come out on strike, so negotiate for the best deal you can get from the employer. But I don't see any real radicalism
yeah,
within the trade union movement, and there's the right
no,
wing of the trade union as well. People that are just self-protectionists. But I'd
yeah.
love to actually see what the yellow vests have done. I know Macron had to back down around some stuff about, I think it was pensions and the retirement age.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
those
yeah, right,
guys are
right.
probably at that a
Hmm.
year now.
Which
See what
was
I
a
mean?
big deal, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
a lot
and
of
I
money
think,
going
I
on.
mean, here in the U.S., I think it's a lot of people would say like the reforms of the 1930s and the New Deal, they get talked about a lot in terms of like Roosevelt's progressivism,
That was the
but I
response
think.
to the Wall
Oh,
Street crash then and the huge unemployment, the Dust Bowl.
exactly. That's the thing. It's like that kind of like it was like what you saw with this big $3 trillion bailout, which was mostly a corporate bailout, but still, the thing was that it was bipartisan, and the reason why there was bipartisan support for this kind of massive government spending, just as in the 30s, was because of the circumstances, but also not just the circumstances, but what were those circumstances? Not just the crash of the stock market and the sudden the loss of work for so many people and the economic situation, but the response to that by the people, which was to organize and to have massive rallies organize unemployed workers councils. They were unevicting people so much that they had to ban evictions altogether in the city of Chicago. So there was this kind of resistance going on in the streets, which led the government. I mean, in 1931, I remember reading in Zinn's People's History of the U.S., it stuck with me. In 1931, just in that 1 year alone, there were 500 different incidences of more than 100 armed people liberating warehouses of their contents, in different parts of the country. Like that was the atmosphere, so it was a sort of a scary situation for the ruling class. But I think as sort of like people might say the same about the riots that you might, they've been characterized as riots anyway in the media after the killing of George Floyd that occurred in cities throughout the country, where, including in Portland, if you go to downtown Portland, you'll see that most of it is boarded up and destroyed, but and that's true of many different cities in this country. And to me, it's like generally, actually living in the context of a country where that's becoming so much more divided between the rich and the poor, where my own rent has gone up by 250% in the past, since I've lived in Portland. It's the kind of untenable situation. It really, I think there's a lot of people who feel really good about seeing all those corporate stores smashed up. It's just not a lot of people aren't shedding any tears about it, and they feel actually it's therapeutic. And I think the people destroying all those stores, it was a wide variety of people, not just the usual black bloc. And they couldn't say this was outside agitators, because it was happening everywhere at the same time. It was a lot of people doing it. It was really quite a cross section, young, very much tending towards the youth, but otherwise quite a cross section of society. And and then that scared the ruling class for sure, regardless of whether the demands were clear. And they're not going to defund the police, but they are probably going to extend a whole lot of moratoriums on evictions, and other kinds of reform. They're going to send more money to people. It won't be enough, and whether it's going to be enough to really changed people's lives for the better, or fend off chaos, or potentially all kinds of movements that the ruling class will feel very threatened by. Who knows what the future holds, but they're scared for sure, because you can't just have. We're looking at 28 million evictions between now and September, and you could see that multiracial crowds of people just trashed the centers of most of the major cities in the country, at the end of last May. So it's a message to them, and they've been responding in their own ham-handed ways, in their own kleptocratic ways. Of course, handing like what 10 to something like 90% of the multi-trillion-dollar bailout really goes to corporations. But that still leaves quite a bit that went to our bank accounts and went to this unemployment scheme that has really been keeping tens of millions of people alive, and now it's going to expire at the end of this month, like in 2 days. So who knows what's next. The unemployment.
Yeah. Well, I assume that that the ruling class will do what they always do. They'll give just enough to enough people to prevent a real kind of upswelling of the working class, or a revolution. I think you could legitimately claim that the majority of people involved in the revolution are the people of no property, the people who have got to the point where they have nothing left to lose except potentially their liberty and their lives. And that's why a lot of governments would subsidize basic food staples like bread and milk and things. So, as a parent, if you can feed your children and try and put a roof over their heads, then that's a responsibility that you take on board. But what I'm really thinking about now is how things go forward. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement, I think they'll struggle to continue every night to come out and protest and protest and protest, especially as people are arrested and people start being fed through the judicial system and the prison system, and perhaps huge fines. And I read today that some of the bail conditions around people who've been arrested is that they can no longer attend any protests going forward. And then there's the police, military, governmental, presidential response. So, I mean, are we witnessing the birth of a fascist state where they're sending the military onto the streets to kidnap people and put them in unmarked vehicles and take them to? Well, I mean, what are we going to start heading towards detention centres or concentration camps, or if the jails begin to fill up? I mean, where will it put the excess people? So, can the Black Slave movement continue in its present state, which from someone outside is protest without result? It appears to be protest for the sake of protest, because there is no tangible result from the protest itself. And will the government, which has militarized the police over the last decade, just send in the cops, send in the military, and you've got like a low warfare, a low civil war between one aspect of the citizens and one aspect of the government? And it doesn't sound good for the next 10 or 15 years going forward, for people aged 15 to 30 to be arrested, given a custodial sentence, or to have this have a criminal record, on inverted commas, for taking on the state. Where will it all go? That's the $64,000 equation.
Yeah, it's really unknown at this point, and it's, of course, you got this movement is happening at a time when, it's probably fair to say that a very large percentage of the people participating are unemployed, because there's suddenly we have 30 million newly unemployed people in this country, and then at the same time they've been stuck at home, trying to be doing the lockdown pandemic thing, and so there's all these other factors going on. People don't know what the future holds. They're unemployed and they have time on their hands, and maybe even a little money, but the money's about to run out. And they've been stuck in isolation, and now they're getting a lot of camaraderie at protests.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of any kind of things being won, it definitely what's going on at the municipal level all over the country, and to some extent at the state level, depending on the state, to varying degrees, is actual reforms that are where sometimes police budgets are being reduced and the money is being put into other kinds of areas. So it's nothing impressive, but I mean, it would be unfair to say that there's no results in terms of like there's definitely been the conversation has changed in a way that is really quite something to hear, at least in terms of when you listen to the public or mainstream or corporate press. They are talking about a lot of things in different ways. Rather than saying things like protesters allege that Christopher Columbus, killed a lot of people and held slaves. It's talked about differently now on CNN. They'll say Christopher Columbus, who colonized the country and killed a lot of people and held slaves. They just talk about it as a fact. The racist history of this country. They'll talk about that as a fact now, not like some people allege the country has a racist history. So I mean, it seems kind of minor, these kinds of changes in a way, and maybe it is, but the conversation is being affected, and so, to some extent, laws are being affected, but it's too early to tell, where this is going. But one thing there's definitely progressive groups, like Black-led progressive groups, that are making a lot of demands of legislatures at various levels that are being listened to much more than they would have been a few months ago. But then at the same time, we're in the midst of a pandemic that is affecting Black and brown people like 4-1 or 5-1 compared to white people. So it's just astounding the compounded impacts of people being working in so-called essential jobs and living in overcrowded conditions and having inadequate access to healthcare, and all this stuff suddenly is so starkly compounded in the form of these statistics: 5-1, 4-1. It's just really quite something. That's also
I was just going to say, that's really my main concern, is that a lot of reforms will be micromanaged. So you'll get people paying lip service to the crimes of slavery and an American racist supremacist history. You'll get the crumbs from the table for food banks and for outdoor relief or whatever's going to come out of this. So I think, for me, both the state and the political establishment and the corporate elite will just say whatever needs to be said and do whatever needs to be done on a limited basis just to keep a cap on this. But if you're correct in 30 million people becoming unemployed in the next two...
That's already happened. We're there now. That's where we're at now. 30 million. Yeah, okay. I mean, ultimately they'll have to do something, right?
When those people have no money, and you've already 5 million people living on the streets, or probably 6
million, right?
By now, there's a powder keg there, just waiting to explode. if this was any other country in the world, the CIA and the Soros foundations and the NGOs would be in provoking a militarized reaction from the protesters. A few people would be shot on the back. The government would be blamed. The police would be blamed, and you would have regime change. But obviously, that's done by America, not
well. That could, you never know. It's a new. I mean, but you got them sending out federal agents in the street to snatch people. So who knows? But it doesn't seem like Trump is such a lame fascist, though. He's such an incompetent fascist, such a completely narcissistic. I mean, it seems like he's trying to play by the fascist playbook, but he's really not executing things all that effectively. I don't know.
I think he's trying to be president rather than being president, if that makes any sense. And with the elections coming up in November, because he's a Republican, he's always going to push the law and order aspect of this. I mean, we hear 50 nights of rioting in Portland, but I've been watching it. It seems very choreographed to me, almost like the riots that we had here. So people go down and protest. They make a lot of noise. that do a lot of shouting. The police response is clear the streets. This is illegal, and they're using is it either stun grenades or flash grenades and tear gas canisters, and then they appear to move forward, and the protesters appear to move back, and it's like a choreographed dance forward and back
Yep.
and forward and back, and then some people end up getting arrested. So, uh,
Very familiar Belfast setting, kind of, and including the boarded up buildings, and I mean it's
the only
yeah.
difference is the accents.
What's that?
Are they
The accents are different. Yeah.
yeah. Are they actually deploying like rubber bullets, baton rounds? I've
Oh
seen
yeah,
some.
yeah, and bean bags and pepper bags and
I've seen people pepper
yes,
sprayed. Yeah.
right. But there's something else called a pepper bag and incredible amounts of tear gas and flashbangs and LRAD, these sound weapons.
Okay.
They've got something that looks like a green laser. I mean, I've seen pictures of it, but I don't know what it was. Like, what is this? It's only the federal agents have that one. That the local cops don't have whatever that is. And of course, they got their tasers. Yeah,
Well,
lots of rubber bullets. Plastic rubber coated steel bullets.
Yeah. I know the baton rounds that they used to deploy here. They go at 70 miles an hour, something incredible. And
Right.
they kill 1 in 15 and they injure 1 in 3. I think are
Right.
kind of statistics when they hit
The statistics, yeah, there was something in, I don't know, some publication recently about the so-called less than lethal weaponry that they use here, and I think the statistics was from U.S. police departments. I'm not sure, but it was like 3% fatal, 15% total permanent injury. Yeah, that's
scary. Like
that's scary. Yeah,
for people who are unarmed and a peaceful protest, like it's quite a vicious response. So nobody knows where this is going to go. There's no political representation for Black Lives Matter other than, I don't know, black representatives within the Democratic.
Well, no, Black Lives Matter. I mean, there are. It's an organization with a very eloquent spokespeople, women, and there's so it's not. But it's not. They've been very.
Rather than
what's that?
They're like lobbyists or a pressure group rather than being.
No. I mean, I think there's so many different people who with different agendas that would identify with the movement, and I think there's some confusion, and for me as well, as whether it's because it's partly an organization that was actually founded by specific people but it was but it's also become just like an idea, much like, industrial workers of the world or Students for a Democratic Society or even the IRA. I mean, so many different things. It's a mindset. It's a sort of way that people identify politically more than an actual organization, even though it's also an actual organization. But I think they've been.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a philosophy, I would imagine.
Yeah, and they have a lot of demands and a lot of perspective around history and how society is about mass incarceration and institutional racism and all sorts of stuff, but without necessarily being a political party in the sense of like I think there's a lot of cynicism in that whole crowd about the political process because, as you say, I mean, Biden is a joke, and he was behind the crime bill in 1996 or 94, and it's well known at this point among many people, particularly among radicals and the black radicals and white radicals and all sorts of people, that this is, people like Biden are just part of the whole mass incarceration and imperialism problem, But and when it comes to, I mean, in the Congress, I mean, the system's rigged. So if you're going to run for office, I mean, there's basically no chance for victory unless you're running under one of the two parties. But the most, there's definitely been an effort to try to take over the Democratic Party on the part of the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, which very much includes the many prominent black and brown politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Presley, Ilhan Omar. There's some great really good, I say radicals in the Congress, but there's just a handful of them. Like in the last military budget, it was like 100 out of the 435 representatives that voted against it.
Mm.
So it had a supermajority, a veto-proof supermajority of bipartisan, but still, it's 100 that voted against it. So I think you could roughly say, the efforts to sort of radicalize the Democratic Party have definitely failed, but there's more progressives than there were maybe 10 years ago.
Well, maybe they're sowing the seed going forward, and maybe there'll be a new crop to grow out of that of real radicals who want to change. But I believe people who join the system, they claim they're going to reform it, then they join it, then they become part of it, then they defend it. Is my personal kind of experience.
I think that tends to be how it goes, and there needs to be protest in the street in a big way. You need to make it financial. You need to be able to shut cities down, but if people are capable of that, of kind of, general strikes and that kind of thing, then anything is possible. You can make politicians do anything if you have that kind of power.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, that's great. I hope something comes out of the sacrifice of all the people, not just all the people who have been lynched by police brutality, but all those people who have protested, all the people who have been arrested, all the people
they're suffering terrible trauma, as you know. I mean, and really serious medical problems, because as you know, being from Belfast, tear gas is really bad for you. And breathing tear gas day after day is really bad for you. And I've been intentionally avoiding that myself, but I have been to a lot of protests in my life, including ones that involved a lot of tear gas, and never more than 2 or 3 days on end of having encountering a lot of tear gas. But I think even that, I mean, even just from one serious day of tear gas in Quebec City in 2000, I had a welt on my eye for 6 months after that. I mean, it's chemical weapons. It's not fucking around.
And in the chest, I'm sure it leaves scar tissue.
Yeah.
If you're overexposed to it for any length of time. Okay, well, when you come on, when we'll see you back, and God knows when we'll see you back.
Yeah, God knows, right? Ask the virus. I'll come as soon as it's safe. And then doing a tour is going to be another question, because what happens if the venues are only allowed to have 25% capacity or whatever, that's not tenable for the venues or for the musicians. So who knows?
I know.
It's a mysterious future
unknown future in many, many, many respects. Well, listen, lovely chatting.
Yeah, really great chatting with you.
So I'll tune in one of these evenings when you're doing your Monday night lockdown specials. So just see
yeah. I'm not doing the open mics anymore on Mondays, but I'm still doing random interviews on other days, and I'll be doing other broadcasting though. Anyway,
I saw a band that are doing what is it? The Black Something Rising.
Oh, this Greek band. What is it? Bard Noir doing Black Flag Flying. Wonderful rendition. Yeah,
fantastic, man. Really proper rock and roll.
Yeah, but how are things in Belfast? What's the scene like with lockdown, with unemployment? Or are you in Belfast now?
Yeah, or down North Belfast.
Yeah.
We've had the people reacted quicker than the government when it came to self-isolation. People started to prevent their kids from going to school, because we could all, I mean, anyone who's all got the internet can read what was happening in China, what was happening in Spain, what was happening in Italy. And we were all frightened because we could just see this domino effect that it was coming our way. Then we had people from Ireland on holiday in Italy skiing. And Italy became one of the epicenters in Europe initially of the COVID-19 virus. So those people brought it back here. So the government, the British government, Boris Johnson and the British Parliament at Westminster, we have devolved regional parliaments. So we have Stormont in the north, then there's a regional parliament in Scotland and one in Wales. But what happened was they wanted a national response. So our politicians got a get out of jail card, because they just waited to be told from Boris Johnson and the British Parliament what steps they were going to instigate and the timeline involvement. And I thought it was a disgrace that was political cowardice. I felt that we were all screaming, "Fuck's sake, lock the place down. How many people you want to die?" I mean, we have a population of around 2 million. and we've had something like 550 deaths, COVID-19, which kind of sounds okay because we were talking about like 12, 14, 16,000. People thought it was like a plague. You were going to have people dying in the streets. But in reality, only 5% of the population here, 5% have been exposed. So
Right.
we had 600 deaths from 5%. When you
Yeah.
multiply that by 20, all of a sudden you're hitting 12 or 13 or 14,000 people. But so nursing homes, because of the age profile and the health, I think 40% of all our COVID-19 deaths have been in nursing homes of people over 65, really. So we went into lockdown and people were put on furlough, which is the same scheme that you might have alluded to earlier, where people are paid kind of to
Hmm.
stay at home. Uh, then the government's concerned about the economy, but that's only because the corporations and the capitalists will be saying to them, here, we can't have this, we're not making money. And you
Hmm.
potentially get mass unemployment. In sectors like hospitality, I mean, Ireland's done very well the last decade, 20 years, excuse me, in tourism. And I suppose you have that economic cycle, the boom bust. So
Hmm.
whenever the world is on a credit boom, people go on holiday, put it on their card, everything's roses in the garden. So it's devastated kind of the bar trade, the restaurants, the hotels, the theaters, the nightclubs, the cruise ships, everything that's associated. And then that has a spillover for taxi drivers and maybe private bus transport and a few other things. So we're slowly coming out of the lockdown and that they're trying to get the kids back to school in September, but they're only going to go for 2 days. So like
Mm.
half school on Monday and Tuesday, and then the school gets the full clean on the Wednesday, then Thursday, Friday, the other half of the school comes in. So for us, the older generation are worried about their personal health and safety.
Mm.
And for parents, they're concerned about the younger children who are maybe beginning to miss out on that social aspect, the
Yeah.
discipline of education, that social aspect of kids playing with other kids. But
Yeah.
about 6 weeks ago, you could drive down the road when it was against, COVID regulations to be doing that and see no cars on the road.
Hmm.
And then 3 weeks ago, it's just like everything's back to normal. The
Hmm.
shops are busy. They've reopened the bars. I was in the bar on Monday night watching the football match. First time I've been in a bar in months.
Hmm.
You know, lots of people in there drinking, just not really caring. And some of the city centre bars that have reopened, it seems to be the young people who are not overly reacting, but they're responding to having been locked down and locked in, and they're all out kind of partying. And but we're getting these wee spikes at different places.
Hmm.
So one person gets it, and then there's a family. People have a karaoke night, or there's a family celebration around a birthday or something. One person has it, gives it to 10 others, they take it home. So what they're
Yeah.
trying to do is the R rate. If it stays below one, then they're going to allow people to continue as normal. And if it
Right.
goes up one, like 1.3, 1.4 in different areas, they're going to have local, regionalized lockdowns, and
Yep.
they're going to do until they get either a vaccine or I don't know, to get the herd immunity, which I think part of this is about. Lockdown, ease the lockdown, more people get infected. Lockdown, ease the lockdown, more people get infected. Eventually, you'll end up with herd immunity around 70%. But we've
Right.
only had 5% of people actually exposed. That's quite worrying.
Yep. That's very interesting situation, huh?
It's same there then, is it? Very similar.
Yeah, except that I think most people haven't even heard of the reproduction rate of one. I mean, if they've listened to BBC in the middle of the night or something, maybe they've heard about it because of Angela Merkel talking about it or something. But they it's just a disaster here. I think most people just feel really confused and uninformed and don't
Misin-
know.
they're misinformed rather than uninformed.
Yeah, they're missing. I mean, they're getting lots of different information from different places, and there's no systematic national plan, and that's a disaster because it's a nation, and there are no borders, and that people can go wherever they want, and it's spreading along the highway corridors. You can see it like where it's spreading. There's a highway that goes from Florida to Maine, and it's spreading along the highway. Yeah.
It's your main arterial route. That's where people travel.
Yeah, yeah,
Diners, the rest stops for the truck drivers and
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
So, well, let's hope we're all here next year.
yeah. And most of us will be anyway. Yeah,
Buddy. Well, I'll go here. It's nearly 11 o'clock, so
yeah. You get some sleep, and I'll send you the MP4.
thank you very
Take
much.
care, for great talking to you.
Bye-bye.